Thank you for joining us on the Going Deeper podcast, a ministry of Fathom Church in Littleton, Colorado. You will never get to the bottom of the depths that are in Christ for you. And our hope with this podcast is that it will help you go deeper with God. So let's dive into this episode of the Going Deeper podcast. What's up, church? This is your host, Kyle Knight, and welcome to the Going Deeper podcast, a podcast where we just have conversations, hopefully help you go deeper in your relationship with God. I'm in the podcast studio with our lead pastor, Chris Martin. Hey, Chris.
Hi.
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Karina Bost is out this week, but you've got us two sitting here.
The boys are back in town.
Here we go.
Some might say.
Some might say that. Yeah.
Very few,
you just
probably.
Said that.
I said that.
You just said that.
Actually, everybody at home is like, well, I should probably turn this podcast off right now.
Either now you're going to skip this
You're
podcast or maybe seeing the title of this episode, maybe you're like, oh, I don't really want to hear about this. Hey, we're going to be talking about the Enneagram this episode. I'm sure there are some of you who know what the Enneagram is and maybe use it, maybe know a little bit about it, and are maybe excited to hear us talk about it. And others might be like, I have no idea what that is and I don't really care. Or maybe you just are sick of hearing about it. But really, we're going to talk about the Enneagram, and I'll have Chris here kind of explain what it is a little bit. But I think the reason why we're talking about this, and we talked about this a really long time ago, years ago, on an older podcast. But I think for us, it's one of those things that's kind of always around. People are kind of talking about it a lot, and it's used a lot within Christian circles and communities, but also outside of that as well. And it's very popular. And so we just wanted to kind of talk about that along with other sort of personality kind of tests sort of things, and just give you our thoughts on it, some good things about it, some not so good things about it, and some just hopefully some words of caution. But Chris, tell us a little bit about what you know of what the Enneagram is and why why do you feel like it's important to talk about?
Yeah. Okay. That's good. So Enneagram is, at the very most basic sense, it's a personality test. It's rooted in some psychology theory and personality theory that, some may agree with or disagree with, but essentially it is a test, primarily it's not a test, I guess. It's primarily a model of 9 different types within this model that the model essentially says that each individual human being has a primary type that both carries with it strengths and weaknesses. It carries with it positives and propensities towards negatives. And you can dive really deep into this, but essentially it is a tool to help do some psychological therapy, self-work on yourself. So it might be comparable to something like Myers-Briggs, other personality tests and things like that, types. You might know Myers-Briggs. That was kind of a pretty famous one, maybe the most famous one until Enneagram has kind of come on the scene, but it's rather new. It has a marred history, a bunch of a contested history as to where it came from but essentially I think in the 70s, during some of the psychological revolution that was happening in the United States, that was really when it first kind of identifiably came on the scene in the United States. And really in the last 5 to 10 years, it's taken off in kind of a populist mode within the United States. But I think the best way to see it is it's a tool to help work individually on your personality, both the good parts of one's natural bent and personality and the difficult, sometimes pitfalls that might come with certain personality markers.
Yeah. I think that's a very good explanation of it. We are not experts in this, but that's a good start. I just said personality test, but again, I think people who really are really into this might say, it's like any other test. Well, it's deeper than just personality. I've heard it's like, how you, it's a good communication tool on how you communicate, how you're best to be communicated to, like all this kind of stuff, how you work well with others, like those sorts of things. So it's one of those. So if you're brand new to this, that's kind of what we're talking about, and this has really kind of blown up in the last handful of years or so. So it's all over the place. So Chris, um, I guess, and we'll kind of go into like the positives and sort of negatives in this. But really, maybe I kind of wanted just a higher level question, just to start this out. In regards to just personality tests, these kind of things in general, from a pastor's perspective, from a Christian perspective, are these things we should stay away from? Are these things because some have history of wherever it came from, like those sorts of things are to not be messed with, but like personality sort of tests. How are we as Christians supposed to handle the online things that we type in some things about ourselves, answer some questions, and it tells us who we are and how we act? Like how do we deal with that? Is
Yeah.
that something that we should take seriously? Is that something that could help us, you said, as like a tool, or is that something we should maybe stay away from?
Uh, so I would say that there will be some who will, by their conscience, want to stay away from something like
Mhm.
this. I think that's completely legitimate. Like for a Christian to say, "Hey, this just doesn't sit right. I don't really like what I'm reading about it. I'm not interested in this, and I'm just going to stay away from it." Good on you. That's a fine response to any personality test. Uh, the polar opposite of that side of the spectrum is this is who I am.
Mm.
Essentially, it's uh, allowing for something like this, or the Myers-Briggs, or the DISC
Mhm.
test, or your power animal, or I don't know, whatever you're a beaver or an otter or a golden retriever, like whatever those things were, like
Uh,
any of those things that you would say that's who I
yeah.
am,
Yeah.
as in that's my identity.
Mm.
I'm a 3.
Mhm.
I'm an
Mhm.
ENTJ. I'm a otter. Like whatever. All of those things are taking it to
You are
the.
so an otter.
No, I'm not,
I don't know.
but that's okay. You don't even know what that is.
I have
Yeah.
no idea.
But all of those things
Mhm.
taken to the extreme are very unhealthy. And I'll
Yeah.
quote, I don't know, myself, who's probably quoting somebody
Mhm.
else, but from many sermons from many different preachers, nobody gets to tell you who you are
Mm.
except for God.
Mm.
Like the test doesn't tell you who you are. Your friends don't get to tell you who you are. Frankly, you don't get to tell you who you are.
Yeah.
You are who God says you are. And so identity can get real muddy when you get overly passionate about any of these personality
Mhm. Mhm.
traits and types and tools. So I would say you are welcome to reject this
Mhm.
as a Christian.
Mhm.
I would caution you strongly
Mhm.
about an all-out embrace of any one personality type or test or something like that. Be very, very cautious of those two polar of that polar. I think the best way, if you are not bound by conscience
Mhm.
not to participate, is to use it as a tool.
Mm.
And so you've already mentioned that. I mentioned that, but the idea that this is a tool that might help explain certain personality traits, certain propensities that you
Mhm.
have. I think that tool can be very helpful. Can be a useful, again, tool in the right context with the
Mhm.
right supervision, with the right safety gloves
Yeah.
and goggles on. Like a tool can be very helpful. A tool can also be really destructive if used
Mhm.
incorrectly and things like that. So we can get into those things.
Yeah.
But I really believe
Yeah.
that if you want to engage something like the Enneagram, look at it as a tool
Yeah.
for individual work that probably should be used not by yourself. Like I would coach you to say, walk with somebody,
Mhm.
not some dummy, okay, who's doing it the same.
Mhm.
Like whether it's a counselor or whether it's a pastor, maybe your D group leader or like a really trusted mentor or somebody who can say, hey, that reflection that you're kind of taking from this personality
Yeah.
test, it's not true. That you need somebody to call out truth and
Yes.
lies to
Yes.
you when dealing with these things. Because again, a tool misused can
Mhm.
lead and wreak havoc.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And we will get into some some of the not so great ways of using these things and what could happen if we use these sorts of things poorly. But Chris, what is okay? So the Enneagram specifically, I know we have taken that. I think right when I first started working here, we've taken it. The men's cohort I mean, 2 years ago, we read a book on that. To kind of going through and figuring out what your type is. But tell us a little bit about your experience with the Enneagram. And then let's start with like some of the positives, some of the
Yeah.
good things that kind of can come out of this and that you
So
have seen come
so
out
the
of this.
nice thing about the Enneagram as opposed to other personality types systems that I've, taken and things like that is that Enneagram is very honest about both your strengths and your weaknesses. Um, the best way I understand it is that every personality has bright spots and shadow
Mhm,
sides.
mhm,
Uh, there's a lot of different language that Enneagram people use around this, but there are things that you crush because you are like that type. Um, and there are inherent pitfalls. There's a shadow side where you might have a propensity uh, towards unhealth in certain areas, and that's just kind of wired into who you are as a person.
mhm,
Uh, some of those things can be really helpful. I've found that helpful
mhm,
in doing self reflection. Again, not staking and banking everything on those things, but recognizing, okay, like I'm functioning in a rather unhealthy way right now around certain things, or oh man, actually, this is me functioning really well and really
mhm,
healthily in my type or whatever. So
mhm,
again, I think it's a really helpful tool that helps us consider why we do what we do, um, why we enjoy certain things, why we are kind of pulled towards certain things, even sinful things. It can help explain some of those things. Um, and so, like again, I have everybody knows if you've been around the church that I go to counseling regularly, and so there have been times where we've talked about some of this stuff in my counseling session. My counselor is really good not to kind of bite all in on this and just like he's not an Enneagram counselor.
mhm,
Like there are those, and uh, I mean, say what you will, I would just hesitate from going all in on
mhm,
something like that. But it's been helpful to say, okay, I identify as a 3, and so that means that I'm going to be. I've got some. It explains why I'm really good at certain things and
mhm,
why I can succeed in some ways, and also it can show up and be like, oh, that might be what I'm doing right now.
mhm,
I'm maladjusted in this way because of just the way that I've been wired, the way that God's made me. So
mhm.
it can be really helpful. Again, I would just say be cautious about pushing
Yeah.
all your chips in on it.
Yeah, and I'm the same way too. I mean, when I first started kind of digging into this and reading the book that we read in our men's group, and then uh, kind of figuring out what type I sort of fit into. I think the few things that stood out to me that were positive, that were good, and you kind of hinted on some of them were it did kind of show me and again it didn't show me like, oh, this is who you are. It's like, yeah, I knew those things. Like, oh, I know that I'm that certain way, that I'm a peacemaker, that it's like I don't like conflict. I'd rather have other people have their opinions heard over mine, and like I knew those sorts of things. But then I think one good thing that comes out of this is you're right, is it's kind of like it kind of tells you some of the challenges in that, and some of like the, hey, like those can be good things, but they could also be not so good things. And even like here's ways that that to kind of get out of that, like that's a good thing for me to like not like conflict. However, if you're like sitting in that place forever, and in certain circumstances, it's not that good of a thing. And so there's a lot of like challenges of like of to really think about. Yeah, like, yeah, I can I can let my voice be heard more.
Mhm.
And so that was really good. But I think one other really good thing for me was my wife got really into it too, and she figured out her type and everything like that. And I think it was just good for us in just learning how to just. I mean, we knew how to communicate with each other. We've been married for a while, but just even a little bit better, and just to know kind of how she kind of works with things, how she is with. I mean, she just loves people and loves being around people, and she is just an extroverted people person. But when it comes to boundaries, she's not great at that, and so that's something that we've gotten to kind of help each other with, and I've gotten to kind of understand her and a little bit more about um, how when she one of her challenges is that she loves people, but she struggles with personal boundaries and saying no to people. And
Mm,
so that is it's just those are the kind of helpful things that it's been helpful in communication. It helps when when you know these sorts of things about people you work with and that you know kind of what makes them tick a little bit and where their strengths are and those sorts of things. And so, yeah, there are, I think, like every other test, there are good positive
yep.
things that come out of this. Um, I do believe I think there are a lot of call them negative or things that we want to caution about these sorts of things. And I think sometimes as the more this is played out and the more people talk about this, I think sometimes there's more of these now more than
Mm,
ever.
mm,
So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you would just caution people in the
yeah.
Enneagram in any of these personality kind of testings. And you've mentioned one big one of like just going all in on
Yeah.
this. Totally get that. What are some other specifics that are like some don'ts about
Yeah.
this that are like, let's try not to do that?
Yeah, good question. So I would start with I've got a few in my head. I would start by saying, don't assume about other people based on their type.
Mhm.
Okay. So Kyle says to me, I'm a Enneagram 9. And I say, all right, so I can just roll over this dude.
Mhm.
Right? Like he's
Yes,
a
you
pushover,
can.
like he's a no, I mean very
Yeah.
very realistically,
Yep.
or
Mhm.
oh, you're an Enneagram 8, so you must be a real aggressive
Yeah.
jerk.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's
Mhm.
not true. Like that's just not true.
Yes.
You might even uh, I think that when we start assuming things about people because of their number, oh, he's
Mhm.
an Enneagram 7, so he
Mhm.
must just be a party animal.
Mhm.
Well, no, that's not what that means. First of all, that's not a good way to interpret the Enneagram. But second, that is not what this tool is meant for.
Yeah.
I think the tool is best used for you doing work on you, not you using it as a lens to look at
Right.
others. Be real careful. Now,
Agreed.
in marriage and things like that, you might be able to
Mhm.
understand one another a little differently. It might be
Mhm.
helpful in some work environments, but be real. That's a slippery slope
Yeah.
to be like, oh, well, she's an 8. And so she
Yeah.
just gets real angsty about
Yeah.
things. Or, like, oh, she's a 1. So she must be really a high perfectionist. And like,
Right.
okay, like just stop.
Yeah.
That's again, you aren't a little box with a number on it,
Right.
nor is anyone else. We
Right.
are vastly more complex than that. So be really careful about that.
And honestly, like I've heard that probably the most,
Yeah.
just in conversation with people about not even talking about this, but about things that are going on in people's lives and conflict they're having with people or whatever like that. And it a lot of the times when it's said like, oh well, yeah, oh well, he's an 8.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, he's a 4. That's pretty, and it's just like they like we're not a number, and then it's just like we're not a number, like one
Right.
number. And then it's like the people who have no idea what you're talking about are like, you guys sound crazy.
Yeah. So I think I think it's real. It's just a temptation
Yeah.
to start doing that, playing that game,
Yeah.
and being like. The other side is I think that personally, people will sometimes use their type as an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kyle, if you are a 9, you
Mm-hmm.
identify as a 9. And so nines tend to be conflict avoidant.
Mm-hmm.
And so you say, well, I don't like to deal with conflict because I'm a 9, so I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, hey,
Right.
something is, I need you, you're the family pastor here. You've got
Mm-hmm.
a hard conversation that you should have
Mm-hmm.
with a volunteer
Mm-hmm.
about some appropriate boundaries that they
Yeah.
crossed or something like that. And you say, well, because I'm a 9, I don't like conflict. And so I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to handle that.
Mm-hmm.
No, 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 no. Please don't use your number as an excuse. it is not an excuse for bad behavior.
Yeah.
So just because I am a 3, which means I tend to be performative,
Mhm.
I can be. Sometimes they call the 3 in some unhealthy ways a chameleon. Like I can just show up and be who I need people
Mhm.
to see me as, can make it seem like I'm fake. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean that I get off the hook for being authentic and sharing
Yeah.
emotions and sharing struggles and sharing fears and
Yeah.
like okay, so that doesn't mean that, oh well, I'm just because I'm a 3, that's just who I
Yeah.
am. No, 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 no. That's not how this plays out.
Yeah.
So be wary first, like I said, first, be wary of over typing people.
Mm.
Second, be wary of using your type as an excuse uh for poor behavior.
Yeah.
Third, I would say be careful of trying to like guess somebody's type.
Mhm.
Like I would just, oh, I'll bet he's oh, did you see the way she handled that? I'll bet she's fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Like I think again, we so want to systematize and kind of break things down and kind
Mhm.
of put people into their little categories. And again, I think the best way to use Enneagram is for self-reflection.
Mm.
It's for, hey, why am I doing these things? And how might I grow and learn about who I am?
Yeah.
Uh, as opposed to, well, I work with a 4 and they're all artsy fartsy and a mess. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh well, that's do you know they're 4? Are they like that's just not how
Right.
this tool is meant to
Right.
be used. So I would just like on the side of the caution of like don't go all in with Enneagram.
Mhm.
Also, look at how you're using it. Are you using it correctly? Do you have again
Yeah.
coaching in your life to help you discern about that? Like a 7 does not get to excuse overindulging at a Christmas party, whether that's on cookies or
Yeah.
on drinks or on friend like hanging out with friends,
Right.
just because they are kind of the celebratory, joyful, excited
Mhm.
number on the Enneagram. No,
Mhm.
no, no. You need self control too.
Yes.
Sevens need to be self controlled. Like actually, you just saying, "Well, that's just who I am." No, no,
Mhm.
no, no. That's not who you are. That might be part of how you're wired, but actually, the Enneagram should reveal that that's who you are, and that there are some work you need to do to curb some of
Mm.
those carnal instincts. So that's I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we could come up with more. Those are just the ones that kind of pop
Yeah.
into my head right away. Is be careful how you use this with each other, and then be careful
Mhm.
about using this as an excuse. Okay, here's the third one or another
Mhm.
one. Be care. I've said this before. I've heard this before. Be careful about weaponizing it,
Mm.
like
Yeah.
either weaponizing it of, uh, well, you're just being a 9 today. Well, the what? Right?
Yeah.
Uh, like using it as an attack or using it as a prejudgment on somebody, like
Yeah.
weaponizing it like that. Oh, I would never work with an
Yep.
8.
Yep.
I had a bad experience with an 8. I'd never work with
Right.
another 8 again in my life.
Right.
Well, that's a, that's, 1/9 of the population. No, I mean, maybe not, but like
Yeah.
that kind of weaponry is again not what this thing is for. So
Mhm.
this is why I want to just give I want to give permission to say if you feel like you can, you're welcome to use this tool, but
Mhm.
also great caution around be careful. Be careful with
Mhm.
this tool. This isn't like, this is it's a power tool,
Mhm.
you know. You swing a hammer the wrong way, you can break something, yourself included. So be careful. Be careful with
Yeah.
this tool. Learn how to use it appropriately, put it away when you're done with it.
Right.
You don't need to carry your hammer with you everywhere you go. Like, I mean, maybe the metaphor falls apart, but I think it's
Yeah. Yeah.
helpful. I think
It
it's a
is.
helpful way to look at it.
It is. It is. Those are good. Those are good. Yeah. Okay. Any last things on this?
Yeah. So I'll close it with this.
Yeah.
Just like when we talk about this, there are primary issues in the scriptures. There are secondary and tertiary issues in the scriptures, and then there are a whole bunch of things that the scriptures
Mhm.
don't talk about. We've talked about that a little bit in this podcast with, how do you handle Christmas? How do you
Mhm.
handle Halloween? There's a lot of things. Can you watch rated R movies? Those kinds of
Right.
things. There's a lot of things that the scriptures are not explicitly forbidding.
Mhm.
And I would have a hard time agreeing with the statement that the scriptures forbid we use the Enneagram because I don't see it in the text. Um, so this comes down to a matter of conscience, like we've talked about. that there is freedom in Christ for the Christian to use this appropriately with wisdom and good boundaries.
Mm.
And there is freedom for the Christian in Christ to say, I don't ever want to expose myself to something like this. And so
Yeah.
I'm not going to use it.
Yep.
There's freedom there. Let's not over lay our convictions on others. We might share some of those things, and people have the freedom in Christ to choose one way or the other. It's just like, do I eat meat or do I not eat meat? That's
Right.
the Pauline example in the New Testament. So this is
Mhm.
a matter of conscience. Though with any matter of conscience, I would just encourage exercise wisdom in
Mhm.
community around these things, and you'll be better served by it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. And again, with these sorts of things, Christian, remember who you are. You are a child of God, and you're not a number, and you're not just a personality.
Right.
Hey, Chris, thanks for the dialogue.
You
today.
bet, buddy. Good times.
Enjoyed it. Hey, thank you, church, for listening. We are out of time today, but hopefully you enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully you learned something, and let us know if you have any other questions on this topic or any other topics that you'd like us to discuss. But thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.